Back to basics. That is the battle cry of the American people at this midterms. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is another declaration of truth from your host, Terry A. Hurlbut. Midterms are coming up. In fact, they will take place, or some say they will close 3 weeks from today. Today! And the American people seem to have decided it's time to get back to basics. The Democratic Party, with their control of the presidency and both chambers of Congress, have ruined the basics. This midterms, the American people will take the first step to removing them from power. As long as the basics were in place, the Democrats could indulge whatever social and amoral fantasies they pleased. But when they ruined the economy, the people cried, enough! As we hear them crying today, 3 weeks plus 1 day from now, we're going to hear a different outcry from a different quarter. And yes, I am going to back that up. Before I do, I want to shout out to the prime sponsor of this channel, which is Conservative News and Views. Link in the description. And be sure to check out the awesome CNAV Store. Scroll down near the bottom of that link. Lots of great merchandise there, including this t-shirt that I have chosen for today, which quotes Aldous Huxley, that Aldous Huxley, saying facts do not cease to exist just because they are ignored. Well, to paraphrase Mohandas Gandhi, yes, that Gandhi, the Mahatma himself, the Democrats ignored the facts. Then they denied them outright. And now they're trying to twist them. But the American people are seeing through that. And that's why the Democrats are going to lose. One thing more, before I dive in, if you like what you're about to hear, you can like this video. You can also click the bell icon to get a notice every time I come out with a new one. In fact, do you see the new icon, the heart shape with the US dollar sign in it? That's the super thanks icon. If you really want to keep these videos coming, click that and leave me a tip. Any currency will do. All right, let's face it, the American economy today is terrible. And that will make America repeat similar back-to-basics movements in the past. We have seen this not only in America, but throughout the history of civilization, Western and Eastern. Periods of affluence cause people to forget the things that brought them that affluence. They indulge the flesh, and more than that, they indulge a wider variety of fantasies. Then disaster strikes. The economy crashes and destroys the affluent first. An external enemy launches a sneak attack. Then the people get back to basics. And the basics are air, water, shelter, and food, and all the things that put them in place and keep them there. They also include the moral sense that lets a society run. Every society has a measure of this cycle, without exception. In America and elsewhere in the Western world, we have the hemline index. Hemlines follow stocks, up or down, the theory states. Now, how has that theory stood the test of time? Because hemlines actually follow the comfort level, real or illusory, of society's members, and more particularly its women. Prices of stocks and other securities are only one measure of the security one might feel. And these foolish Democrats have assailed every measure of security that matters, and we all know it. The Heritage Foundation has pulled off the real October surprise, which should surprise no one. Mike Vance at the Daily Patriot Report has the story. Americans are $6,000 a month poorer today than at the president's inauguration. Mr. E.J. Antoni of the Heritage Foundation explains everything to Fox News. I have a link in the description to a tweet from Heritage Action for America carrying that interview. Here's what the man says, quote, "No matter how Biden tries to spin the numbers, Americans understand the reality of the economic crisis they are living through every day." Unquote, E.J. Antoni. That crisis affects them where they live when basic necessary staples cost so much that they have to skip meals. As E.J. Antoni further explains, quote, people are just absolutely being crushed. It's not the price of caviar and yachts that are driving these numbers. It's necessities. It's staples. It's things like eggs, milk, flour, soup. These are things that are up 20 or 30% year over year. Close quote. And the American people know whom to blame. E.J. goes on, quote, inflation was 1.4% when Biden took office. It was essentially non-existent. And somehow, in just 18 months, he ran it up to over 9%. Again, it really is like these people live in a fantasy world. It's mind-boggling. Close quote. Well, you've heard the president and his fellow Democrats try to deny it, but they can't and they know it. We know that they know it because now they're trying to blame the Republicans. In fact, the president actually says, and again I quote, if Republicans win, inflation is going to get worse. It's that simple. No, Mr. President, you're lying. That's what's simple. Now, where else have we seen societies have to get back to basics? Actually, we can look all the way back to the ancient Hebrews, who had split into two rival civilizations since 975 BC. Specifically, we can examine the time of the reign of Jeroboam II of Israel, meaning Samaria, and kings Amaziah and Uzziah of Judah. 2 Kings tells us little about Jeroboam's reign, but Amos, one of the minor prophets, tells us plenty. Jeroboam's subjects divided themselves into two classes, the affluent and the impoverished. No such thing as a middle class existed then. His affluent subjects behaved cruelly to the impoverished ones and indulged in all sorts of pleasure. And I'm talking about pleasures of the table as well as the bed. Amos warned them that a time would come when they would lose it all. They didn't listen. Jeroboam died after a 41-year reign, and his son succeeded him. His reign was appallingly brief, for in 6 months a royal army officer killed him and took his throne. Thus Israel became a banana kingdom without the bananas, as king killed king in turn. The one exception to this was King Menachem. He managed to pass the throne on to his son. But 2 years later, another assassin, Pekah, continued the regicide cycle. King Hosea, the last of the regicides, lost everything to an external conqueror, that being Shalmaneser V, king of Assyria. Now the kingdom of Judah would face its own crisis from Shalmaneser's son, or some say grandson, Sennacherib. But Judah had a king, Hezekiah by name, who showed better sense. He tried paying tribute, but he learned fast that tribute never satisfies, so he asked for God's help, and he got it. Oh boy, did he get it. Sennacherib had his whole army annihilated by divine intervention. So he took himself back home, where 2 of his own sons assassinated him. So much for Sennacherib. Now I have other stories of ancient civilizations getting cracked like nuts at the height of their affluence. I'm going to talk about ancient Troy and ancient Rome. Before I do, I want to shout out to a sponsor who can really help you through the economic storms to come. That sponsor is oursilverlines.com. Do you feel like you're working harder for your money just to get by? You're not alone. The fluctuating economy, employment issues, and unexpected changes in life have left many families struggling over the past few years. Collecting gold and silver can help shield you against many of these challenges. But if you're like me many years ago, you don't know where or even how to start. Our Silver Lines helps by connecting you with thousands of members who are learning the secrets to creating and protecting true wealth by collecting precious metals. Whether you just want to collect rare and unique coins or take advantage of the business opportunities that this company provides, either way, they can help you learn to live an exceptional life. Visit oursilverlines.com to learn how you can build a legacy for your future. And by the way, here I'm talking about getting back to basics. Precious metals are as basic as it gets. Now, where were we? Ah, yes. Civilizations face their most challenging tests often at the height of their affluence, especially when they consider themselves unassailable. There's a little hill on the southern shore of the Dardanelles. 9 cities have sprung up, flourished, and died on that hill. This site, of course, we call Troy. The 6th or 7th city of that name is the one under King Priam that went up in flames after a 2-year siege by the Achaean League, meaning Mycenae, Sparta, Ithaca, Boeotia, several other city-states. They too considered their city impregnable and derived their income from laying tolls on every ship that passed through the Dardanelles. They called it the Hellespont in those days. The Achaean League finally laid siege to them. Now, the elopement of Sparta's Queen Helen might or might not have been the final provocation. For 10 years, Troy's walls held. Finally, the besiegers pretended to leave, and they left behind a tall wooden horse on wheels. This was an open invitation, and the Trojans took it. The problem was that the horse was full of soldiers under the command of King Odysseus of Ithaca, with the result everyone knows. The Roman Empire had several boom and bust cycles. In fact, the civil wars that began when Caesar crossed the Rubicon and ended when Augustus chased Antoni and Cleopatra into Alexandria, where they killed themselves, bankrupted Rome. Augustus took things in hand and brought Rome back from the brink. Not all of his successors were as wise as he. In 454, Rome, even more decadent than ancient northern Israel, finally fell. We turn now to the American experience. A century of American history classically includes boom and bust. Americans definitely had to get back to basics in the 1930s. Marconi, who invented radio, had television ready to produce, but after October 1929, no one could afford it. Radio and motion pictures would be as much entertainment as Americans had through the Depression and the Second World War. Americans also accepted the Motion Picture Production Code and the Production Code Authority, the Hays Office. Would you like to imagine why Americans would accept such an intrusive, blue-nosed outfit like the Hays Office, telling motion picture producers what they could or could not show on screen? I'll tell you, the American people likely accepted, even demanded an institution like the Hays Office because the spectacle of indulgence in the pleasures of the flesh would have revolted them. That kind of indulgence was all very well in the roaring 20s. It had no place in a society that had to get back to basics. Hemline Index probably got its start in the transition from the flapper style of the 20s to the more conservative women's fashion in the 30s. After the war came a very brief downturn, which ended abruptly when President Harry S. Truman cut taxes. Prosperity came back, and with it, the same kinds of indulgences the 20s had seen. More than women's fashion would illustrate this. Permissiveness of every kind began to take hold, and has definitely held sway during the Roe era, from 1973 to 2022. In fact, such permissiveness took hold in the late 60s. A spirit of indulgence has corrupted every institution for about 60 years, during which time the people have turned aside from the basics to experiment even with how their bodies work. Well, reality has a way of biting you in the seat if you ignore it too long. An unprecedented series of disasters has brought home the stern distinction between fantasy and reality. Never mind the theories that the election of 2020 might not have had a just result. That result could have come from a divine intervention, much like the hardening of Pharaoh's heart before the Exodus. You ever think of that? Sometimes God shows us how important the basics are by letting people turn away from them. that being the best way to show what happens. Well, who wouldn't want to get back to basics now? E.J. Antoni has explained the economic situation, as I've already told you, but enough people seem to have heeded the call already. Now, true enough, the American Medical Association has gone all in on not only defending their experiments on children, but wanting federal authorities to prosecute anyone who objects. Now just imagine Victor Frankenstein getting the Kaiser to issue that kind of decree. We also remember the National School Boards Association demanding something similar. But now, parents, many of whom were willing to toy with fantastic notions of remaking human beings, are recoiling. We didn't sign on for any of this, they seem to be crying out. Well, even if they did, they're not any longer. Outraged parents like these elected Glenn Youngkin, governor of Virginia. Recently, he told school authorities that the era of indulging in child experimentation or pretending that any student is not what he or she is over. High school students, still the dupes of the would-be experimenters, walked out of class on the strength of it. That I have from station WTVR-TV, Channel 6, Richmond, Virginia. Governor Youngkin is unmoved. His message is plain. We're getting back to basics. And so are the American people. Briefly, over the summer, the Democrats told themselves they could save themselves by plumping for permissiveness in another area. The Supreme Court, in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's, gave them cause to so pretend. Or maybe they just skewed the polls. But remember what I told you the day after Dobbs went down? I said that Dobbs was not the final answer to that particular kind of indulgence. In fact, I told you after the Great Leak that that kind of indulgence would decline maybe 10% nationwide. I also predicted that Democrats would nominate fanatics that would make even more people shudder and vote against them. Nominate them they have. John Fetterman in Pennsylvania calls himself Fetterwoman, is the booby prize example. But most of all, I predicted no effect on midterms except to harden certain hearts. And I see that today. Inflation has gotten worse, not better, since the president first started trying to take credit for beating it. After first cutting off our own oil supply, the president tried to persuade Saudi Arabia to sell oil sans cheap. The Saudis essentially showed him the soles of their shoes. And I'll tell you, that is a deadly insult in the Arab world. They cut production and told the world what the president tried to demand of them. Prices of motor fuel are already rising again, and this time the president can't stop it. More to the point, Jimmy Carter's misery index is still climbing. This president will thus lose for the same reason Jimmy Carter did. The people are going to get back to basics, and the Democrats cannot dissuade them. Link in the description of the article to E.J. Antoni's interview with Fox News and to Conservative News and Views. I've also left links to the awesome CNAV Store and to oursilverlines.com, as I also mentioned. You know already about how to like a video, turn on notifications, and leave a tip. And on the end screen, I'm going to leave a subscribe link to my channel and to at least 3 other videos I've done talking about what's really important, while the Democrats are caterwauling about a return to theocracy, which is not what conservatives want, but it's what the Democrats want to call it. This is Terry A. Hurlbut delivering another declaration of truth and reminding you to let the truth set you free.